Elena Moreau stepped through the revolving doors of Valen Company headquarters, one of the largest private financial conglomerates in Europe. In her hand was an old mop and a stainless steel bucket. Light reflected off the polished marble floor, making scuff marks nearly invisible. She wore a pale blue uniform with frayed cuffs, her employee badge swinging at her hip, Elena M, Cleaning Services. But if anyone looked closely into her deep, calm brown eyes, they would notice something different. Not fatigue, not submission, but sharp observation, quiet calculation, and a plan waiting to be set in motion. Most people passing by, secretaries, legal department staff, executive assistants, didn't spare her a second glance. Elena Moreau, 34 years old, with light brown skin and tightly curled hair pulled back neatly, blended into the background like a table or an elevator there, but unnoticed. She liked it that way. Valen Company was an empire. Its headquarters, a glass tower in Frankfurt's financial district, stood as a symbol of power, tradition, and a deeply entrenched arrogance. Elena made her way to the supply closet on the ground floor, opened the metal door, and stood still for a few seconds. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Today was not a regular cleaning day. For more than 6 years, Elena had quietly been acquiring company shares through subsidiaries, trusts, and intermediary partners. Small, trace-resistant pieces. No one, not even the executive board, had realized that a majority of voting power now rested in her hands. And today, she wasn't here to mop the floors. She was here to flip the board. On her way to the elevator, Elena passed the employee break room. A young intern, light blonde hair, glasses, stirring coffee, stole a glance at her. Is she new? The girl asked her friend, a guy wearing a badge labeled HR intern. Probably. Looks like the kind that won't last a week, he said with a smirk. People like her don't get seen around here. Elena heard every word, but she didn't stop. She was used to comments like that. Every remark, every glance, like small blades, not deep enough to kill, but dangerous when they accumulate. By now, Elena had learned how to turn those blades into reasons to keep moving forward. 42nd floor, executive suite. When the elevator doors opened, Elena stepped into a different world, clear glass, gleaming oak, and the quiet that only power can command. Through the glass wall of the main conference room, she saw the executive leadership gathered around the table. Ulrich Weber, CEO, neatly combed silver hair, cold eyes; Hugo Stein, CFO, expert at cutting staff; Sebastian Kruger, head of strategy. Always smiling dangerously. Elena didn't barge in. She stood there, cleaning the outer glass, quietly listening. Last week's merger went down pretty smoothly, Ulrich said, pouring himself a glass of Macallan. Even sweeter when you don't have to share the profits with low-level staff, Hugo scoffed. Sebastian smirked. That new cleaning lady, who hired her? She looks like she wandered in here from a train station. Laughter rang out. Elena didn't flinch, but she remembered every word, every face. They thought they were talking about a nobody, but they were the ones stepping into a game they no longer controlled. Back in the hallway, Elena encountered the young intern from earlier, fumbling with some dropped documents. Elena knelt to help her. The girl hesitated, then said softly, I know they're not kind here, but don't let them make you feel small. They may run everything, but that doesn't mean they're always right. Elena looked at her. There was something about the girl that reminded her of herself years ago, those early days, poor, ambitious, and invisible. She smiled gently. I'm not small, dear. I'm just waiting for the right moment to stand tall. The next morning, same pale blue uniform, same badge at her hip. But Elena Moreau was no longer here to clean floors. She walked straight into the executive boardroom. Ulrich Weber frowned. What are you doing here? Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. I'm here to attend the meeting. Hugo narrowed his eyes. This meeting is for board executives only. She laid the documents on the table. Exactly. And under shareholder law, I, with 52.4% of voting shares, now hold controlling interest in company policy. Silence. Ulrich's face turned pale. You, how? Elena smiled. While you were busy laughing behind others' backs, I was quietly building an empire of my own. Today, the order changes. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Valen Company froze the moment Elena Moreau laid the paper on the table. The high-backed leather chairs, the glass walls overlooking the Frankfurt skyline, and the digital display showing profit charts all became silent backdrops to a rare sight. A woman in a janitor's uniform asserting ultimate authority with a calm voice and unblinking eyes. Ulrich Weber, the company's veteran CEO, snatched the document from the table as if to prove it was some kind of joke. But within seconds, as his eyes scanned the lines, his face stiffened. His throat moved as if to speak, but no sound came. For a moment, no one in that room was in control. Not Ulrich. Not Hugo Stein, the chief financial officer. Not Sebastian Kruger, a head of strategy. All eyes turned toward the woman who quietly sat in the empty chair near the head of the table, hands clasped, her expression showing neither arrogance nor pride. "I'm not here for theatrics," Elena said, her voice steady and cold as running water. "I'm the legal representative of Elena Moreau Holdings. Through a network of trusts and anonymous shareholders, I currently hold 52.4% of the voting shares in Valen Co. Sebastian leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Impossible. We'll verify it. There's no way this slipped past oversight." Elena tilted her head slightly, her gaze unmoved. "I learned this game from people like you. Stay hidden, fragment ownership, restructure. Nothing is impossible when no one's paying attention to you." A knock broke the silence. The company's chief in-house counsel stepped in with freshly printed documents. His face paled as he nodded. "The information is accurate. Voting control belongs to Ms. Moreau." In that moment, Valen Co. was no longer an untouchable fortress of suited men. It had become a ship with a new captain. Elena rose, her eyes sweeping the room. "I didn't come for revenge. I came to correct what you've mistaken as normal. You've run this company like a closed club, serving only yourselves, slashing benefits, discarding loyal employees, and awarding yourselves bonuses that the people downstairs would need a lifetime to earn." Hugo Stein jumped to his feet, face flushed. "You don't understand modern financial structures. Cost distribution." Elena cut in, her voice even. "I was once a valuation analyst for the Tierman Fund in Geneva. I understand the structure. But I've also held a rag to scrub restroom tiles. I understand what it truly costs to keep a company running. Something you've never bothered to consider." Silence fell again. Ulrich sat still, eyes fixed on the table, clutching his glass of water as if it were the only stable thing left beneath him. Elena continued, firm and clear. "A special shareholder meeting will be called next week. We'll be reassessing the entire executive structure. There will be an independent oversight committee representing employees. I'll meet personally with every department head this week. And from now on, decisions will no longer be made behind closed doors." She stepped out of the boardroom, leaving behind men who once believed they were the center of the universe. Elena said nothing more. But each of her footsteps echoed across the stone floor like a hammer striking the tempo of a new era. Instead of heading down to the ground floor, she entered another elevator and pressed the button for the third floor, home to the tech department, IT, and supplies. The people working there rarely saw anyone from the executive suite. When she appeared, some looked up curious, unsure whether to speak. A young man in a gray hoodie with headphones around his neck, his badge reading Felix, walked over slowly. Are you the one who just?" "Elena," she said, reaching out a hand. "I'm here to listen. Not through assistance. Not through reports. I want to know how this company actually works and who's really keeping it from falling apart." Felix's eyes widened, then lit up. He shook her hand firmly. Might be the first time someone upstairs ever said that. When Elena left, the room was still quiet. But the silence was no longer the kind born of neglect. It was the kind born of anticipation. Meanwhile, in a darkened office down the hall on the 42nd floor, 3 people sat around a small table, Ulrich, Sebastian, and Ingrid, the COO. No more coffee. No more whiskey. Just the pale glow of the screen and anger pressed into clipped sentences. "She planned every move," Ulrich said hoarsely. "Then we need a move she didn't see coming," Ingrid replied, her voice sharp and cold as steel. Sebastian looked out the window, the Frankfurt night sprawling beneath them. "Empires don't fall in a day. And if she flipped the board, maybe we just need to flip a few pieces." What they didn't know was that Elena had already anticipated this response. And that she wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to rewrite the rules. Elena's new office was on the 41st floor, just below the executive suite, but the atmosphere was entirely different. No walnut-paneled walls, no classical paintings, and no expensive liquor. Just a tidy desk, a corkboard full of pinned notes, and a glass window overlooking the city. She didn't need power to be decorated. True power didn't lie in paintings. It lived in what you knew and what you were preparing for. Days had passed since that fateful meeting. The system hadn't fully changed, but its foundation had cracked. Elena had begun the process of reform, replacing the head of HR, initiating a company-wide review of salaries and bonuses, and introducing a new internal complaints procedure. One that allowed employees to submit issues directly, without being filtered by middle management. The backlash didn't come head-on. came from behind. On the fourth day, her new assistant, a sharp-minded woman named Clara Eberhardt, who had volunteered to transfer from the internal legal department, handed her an unmarked file. It was a tech procurement contract that Valen and Company had signed 7 months earlier. "Did you know this company, Nexcentrix, is actually a shell?" Clara asked. "I traced the legal filings in Liechtenstein. The ownership structure loops around and lands back at a private fund, whose director just happens to be Hugo Stein's ex-wife." Elena raised an eyebrow, her gaze landing on the contract value. 12 million euros for a data system that had yet to function properly. "This deal was approved by Sebastian and Ulrich," Clara continued. "No financial oversight. Signed off under strategic confidentiality." Elena wasn't surprised. But evidence, concrete, traceable evidence, was something else. Now she held a card worth playing. That afternoon, she summoned Sebastian Kruger to her office. He walked in with his usual calm, taking a seat without being asked. "I assume you found something." "You assume correctly," Elena replied, placing the printout in front of him. "The question is, what do you plan to do about it before I take it to the shareholders?" Sebastian stared at her for a few seconds, then gave a faint smile. "If you think I'm afraid of being fired, you don't understand me. I didn't come here to keep a seat. I came to keep influence." "Influence isn't built on money laundering," she replied, her gaze steady. Sebastian didn't deny it. He stood, adjusting his cuffs. "You know, Elena, what makes you truly dangerous isn't your power. It's that you actually believe you're sharp enough not to make mistakes." As he walked out, Clara watched him through the barely cracked door. "You think he'll back off?" she asked. Elena shook her head. "No, but he just confirmed something more important. His hands are dirty, and someone will want to keep them clean by smearing someone else." That night, an anonymous email was sent to all senior management at Valen Company, titled, "The Uncrowned Queen, the Secret File on Elena Moreau." Attached was a PDF detailing Elena's past. Her impoverished family background, her mother's debt-related lawsuit, a year she dropped out of university after losing a scholarship, and a few high-risk investments from her early 20s. Some successful, others catastrophic. Nothing was entirely false. But the way it was framed, it was clearly meant to destroy her. The next morning, Clara printed the file and laid it on Elena's desk. "Do you know who sent it?" Elena nodded silently. She knew. It wasn't Ulrich. It wasn't Sebastian. She suspected Ingrid, the chief operating officer. From the beginning, Ingrid had remained neutral, never openly opposing Elena, but never offering support either. And most importantly, she was the type who never acted directly. That afternoon, Elena hosted her first internal meeting with team leaders from technical, logistics, HR, and IT departments, people who had never before been invited into the executive boardroom. One of them, a middle-aged man named Marius, the head of electrical systems, asked with cautious sincerity, "You want to change the way we work, but will the board even let you? I've seen them kill the best proposals with just one phone call." Elena smiled, meeting his gaze. "They won't do that anymore. And if they try, this time I'll expose them in broad daylight." As night fell, the lights on the 41st floor remained on late. Elena sat before her corkboard, drawing red lines across the timeline with a marker. She knew the battle for control was over. But the war to keep that control and use it to drive real change had only just begun. And beyond those glass walls, her enemies were already shifting shape. That day, the entire 10th floor, usually reserved for financial seminars and partner meetings, had been cleared of its tables and replaced with rows of upholstered chairs arranged in a semicircle facing a presentation stage. Over 200 shareholders, investors, department heads, and employee representatives were in attendance. Everyone knew the reason for this special meeting. Elena Moreau, the woman who had just overthrown the former executive board, was about to unveil her plan to completely reform Valen and Company. In the press, the event was dubbed the Power Reshaping Summit. But inside the company corridors, it had another name, the unofficial trial of Elena. When Elena stepped onto the stage, she was no longer in her blue uniform. Today, she wore a simple black suit, no logos, no designer labels. Her hair was tied up, no jewelry, no tablet, no assistant by her side. Just her, a few papers, and the watchful eyes of an entire institution. 1 month ago, Elena began, I walked into this building with a mop and a bucket. Some thought I was in the wrong place. But today, I stand here not to explain why I'm present, but to show you why I had to be. A murmur spread through the hall. Elena didn't pause. Valen Co was once a symbol of discipline, growth, efficiency. But it was also a symbol of imbalanced power where a small group at the top determined the fate of thousands below. They called it strategic governance. I call it disconnection from reality. She looked around the room. Some eyes met hers with empathy. Others looked down. But there were those Ulrich Weber, Ingrid, and Sebastian who stared coldly, watching for a single misstep. As Elena outlined her proposed reforms, 360-degree internal evaluations, a whistleblower protection system, a revised salary ceiling policy, an elderly shareholder with silver hair stood up. You speak well, Ms. Moreau. But Valen is a financial machine, not a charity. No sooner had he finished than Sebastian Kruger stepped confidently to the podium as if he'd been waiting. If I may add, he said smoothly, I've worked with Ms. Moreau. She's smart. But ideals don't keep a corporation running. What she proposes could disrupt cash flow, reduce productivity. And I ask all of us here, how much are we willing to risk in pursuit of a dream of reform? Nods rippled through the crowd. It seemed Sebastian was beginning to shift the narrative. Elena nodded slowly. Then she took the microphone and walked toward him. You're right. This is a risk. And I don't deny that. But let me ask in return, how much have we already risked by letting the same group of people run things for 2 decades without oversight? How many shady contracts? How many burnt-out employees? How much trust have we lost? She pulled a folder from her jacket. A €12 million contract for the Nexcentrix system, approved by Sebastian, signed off by Ulrich, and traced back to a company connected to Hugo Stein's immediate family. No board review. No disclosure. The room erupted in gasps. Those who had been silent began to murmur loudly. Ulrich shot to his feet but said nothing he couldn't. His signature was on the document. Elena turned back to the crowd. I'm not here to tear down but to illuminate. And if any of you think I should step aside, I will. But only if there is someone else ready to step forward and take responsibility for every single action. Not with numbers, but with truth. Silence. Then scattered applause from the center rows. Then more. Some didn't clap. Some looked away. But no one argued. The reform vote was distributed. 53% in favor, just enough to officially trigger the overhaul. That evening, Elena returned to her office on the 41st floor. Clara was waiting, looking uneasy. I found out, she said. The person who sent the anonymous email, it wasn't Ingrid. Elena stopped mid-step. Who? Jonas Keller. Head of data. The one you nominated for the Internal Transparency Board. A long silence followed. Then Elena sat down, saying nothing. Winning a battle wasn't winning the war. The higher you climbed, the closer the knives were to your back. The amber light of late afternoon spilled through the large glass windows of the 41st floor office, stretching across the meeting table where Elena sat motionless. In front of her was a printed copy of the anonymous email Clara had left that morning. The sender's name had been hidden, but after a night tracing internal network activity, Clara had found the original IP address, Jonas Keller, head of data, and the very person Elena had just nominated to the Internal Transparency Committee. Jonas, the one who had spoken in her defense at last week's executive meeting, who once said we need a system that works for everyone, not just the top floor. The one who had accompanied her down to the technical department to hear from staff about losing bonuses during the pandemic. Now, it was him who had sent a document reviving her past, written in sly, insinuating tones. Enemies from the outside she had anticipated. Betrayal from within, that was what she hadn't wanted to admit she'd misjudged. Clara waited for a response. Elena said nothing. Her fingertips brushed the table surface as if she were replaying every conversation she'd had with Jonas, every nod of support, every word of advice. Call him up, she said, so softly it barely left her lips. 12 minutes later, Jonas Keller entered. Same rolled-up shirt sleeves, same neat slacks, the same polite face, but now his eyes held hesitation. No longer the ease of a comrade, but the guardedness of a man who knew his mask had slipped. Elena didn't offer a seat. He chose one on his own across from her. What do you need? Jonas asked, voice firm but forced. Elena slid the printout toward him. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. Why, she asked, her voice utterly neutral. Jonas exhaled slowly, leaning back. You've changed, Elena. From the moment you stepped onto the 42nd floor. You started sounding like them. making decisions like them. I'm not against your reforms, I'm against power just changing hands instead of being shared. You sent an anonymous email to preach democracy? Elena asked, her voice calm to the point of chilling. By distorting someone's past with selective context and cheap insinuations? Jonas didn't look away. I wanted to remind you that the past matters. And that people like me who once stood beside you are not here to obey. A heavy silence hung in the air. Elena gave a slight nod as if acknowledging there was a sliver of truth in his words. Do you know what the most dangerous part of power is, Jonas? He waited. It's not the enemies, Elena said. It's when people start believing they know your whole story based on the pieces they choose to see. She stood. You have two choices. 1. Resign from the Transparency Committee. 2. I bring your anonymous email to the board and trust me, you won't have a seat left in this system. Jonas clenched his fists. He likely hadn't expected this. No yelling, no threats, just quiet certainty. That made it harder to read. I'll resign, he said, biting his lip. But you won't hold on to this forever. They're waiting for you to fall. Elena looked him in the eye. I know. But I'd rather fall for moving forward than stand still for the sake of safety. After Jonas left, Clara returned. Should I draft a formal resignation notice? Do it, Elena said. And replace him with someone from downstairs. Someone who's never stepped into the boardroom. Clara nodded. But before she left, she paused. Do you still trust anyone? Elena smiled faintly. No. But I have to act like I do. Because if I don't, nothing will ever change. In a small office on the top floor, Sebastian Kruger sat across from Ingrid. A list of minor shareholders lay between them, those with less than 1% each, but collectively enough to shift the balance. We've sown the seeds of doubt, Ingrid said, voice low and steady. Now it's time to consolidate. Sebastian nodded. She's strong, but she's alone. And someone alone must choose between winning and surviving. They clinked glasses. In their eyes, the power struggle had entered a new phase, quieter, sharper, more personal. That evening, Elena exited the ground floor elevator unannounced. Alone, she walked across the central square where people drank beer and played street music. No one recognized her as the leader of one of Europe's largest financial firms. And she liked that. She liked returning to invisibility where no one judged her by a brand on her clothes or a title on a business card. She sat on a stone bench and looked up at the sky. Power, to her, had never been something to possess. It was something to use to guide something bigger than herself. But one truth she had come to accept. To lead, sometimes you have to walk alone. Monday morning. A company-wide internal memo appeared in every Valen Co inbox. Subject: Updated compensation policy and performance incentive restructuring. Summary: 35% reduction in bonuses for senior management roles, including department heads and team leaders. 50% of the reclaimed funds to be reallocated into a staff development fund used to raise base salaries for technical, administrative, and operations personnel. All departments must make their performance evaluation process transparent and publicly accessible. Policy effective from next quarter. There was no mention of penalty. No words like cut or punishment. But to the middle managers, those who always believed they were too low to be hated, too high to be ignored, it was a gut punch. Within an hour, internal chat groups exploded. At finance, a manager named Marcus Lenz slammed a report on the table. So now we do more, carry more, and split pay with part-timers in the basement? In PR, a team lead muttered, she's giving cake to the poor by taking it from the kitchen staff. Even in HR, a department known for staying neutral, someone murmured to Clara during coffee break. She wants fairness? Fairness isn't flattening. High pay reflects high responsibility. If everyone's equal, why try harder? Clara didn't reply. But back in the office, she saw Elena standing in front of the corkboard, pinning anonymous letters, leaked emails, and performance charts. You knew there'd be backlash, Clara said. Elena turned slightly. I still on the board. I hoped there would be. If there wasn't, I wouldn't be hitting where it truly hurts. That afternoon, an expanded executive meeting was held with department heads and shareholder reps present. The air was heavy. Sebastian sat at the far end, silent, fingers intertwined. Ingrid arrived late, speaking not a word. As Elena walked up, she didn't need to look to know. Most people in the room didn't want her there. But her gaze was steady. I know many of you are unhappy, she began. I know some of you feel something has been taken from you, something you deserved. But let me ask, were those bonuses ever truly tied to performance, or just quiet dividends in a closed system? No response. She advanced to the screen. A graph appeared, a 10-year comparison of bonus growth between executives and operations staff. One number stood out. Executive bonuses increased 218% in 5 years. Operational staff, 3%. Elena, it's more complicated than that, Ingrid said. We don't just work for money. We carry risk. And I don't deny that, Elena replied. But if risk is the only metric, then the person scrubbing hazardous chemicals each night deserves more than the CEO. No one spoke. No one walked out. But dissent simmered beneath the silence, and Elena felt it. Night fell. Valen and company remained lit. Elena stood by the glass wall overlooking the city. Each light in the apartments below represented a person surviving, working, pushing on. She hadn't forgotten why she started. Just then, Clara entered, placing a slim envelope on the desk. This just came in from Nui Frankfurt, she said quietly. Someone leaked information about your failed investment with Vega Capital. Elena opened it. The draft article's headline read, Valen's reform queen, but nearly bankrupted hundreds with one bad bet? She clenched her hand around the page. No panic. No surprise. But for the first time she felt cold. Not because of the story, but because she didn't know who among those around her had sent it. Thursday morning, the Nui Frankfurt newsroom released its digital bulletin earlier than usual. The headline dominated the front page. Elena Moreau, from floor cleaner to Valen's queen, but is her financial past now threatening her future? Beneath the headline was a split image. On one side, a photo of Elena in janitorial uniform on her first day at Valen and Company. On the other, a portrait from the shareholders' meeting with hundreds of eyes fixed on her. The article didn't attack her outright, but every sentence carried a subtle challenge. Her unexplained disappearance after leaving a finance program in Paris. The disastrous Vega Capital investment in 2016, where she served as a senior strategy advisor. Allegations of lack of transparency in her acquisition of Valen shares through anonymous funds. The final line posed a mocking question. A person can change, but can a system soaked in financial blood be changed by someone who once lived inside it? On the 41st floor, Clara entered with a printed copy in hand, her face pale with concern. They've requested a live interview. I think we should decline, she said. Elena didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window, looking out at the bustling Frankfurt streets below. Then she said softly, No, we'll accept. Live, uncut, unedited. Clara froze. Are you sure? They might trap you. Elena turned back, her eyes steady. Clara, if we don't tell our own story, someone else will tell it for us and they'll twist it however they want. This isn't about protecting my image. This is about reclaiming control of the truth. 48 hours later, a makeshift studio was set up inside Valen headquarters. In front of the camera for Nui Frankfurt sat veteran journalist and Raf, known for once bringing down a cabinet minister with a single live interview. Across from her was Elena, hair neatly tied, black suit, sitting upright. The cameras went live. The broadcast began. And wasted no time. First question, Ms. Moreau, Vega Capital. You advised a fund that resulted in 432 investors losing everything. Do you bear any responsibility? Elena nodded slowly. Yes. Not legal responsibility, I wasn't on the executive board. But ethical responsibility? Absolutely. I believed in a model I didn't fully understand. And I stayed silent when I saw others trying to hide the losses. And raised an eyebrow. And now you're leading another financial company. Isn't that history at risk of repeating itself? Elena smiled gently. I'm not leading Valen to repeat history. I'm here to break it. I choose transparency because I've seen the cost of silence. And shifted gears. What about your acquisition of Valen shares through anonymous funds? Was that concealment? No, Elena said firmly. I followed the law, the same legal architecture Valen once used to protect people like them. I just used it to dismantle them. As the interview neared its end and asked one final question. If you lost everything tomorrow, power, position, reputation, what would you do? Elena paused. Then said, I'd start over. Like my mother did. Like I once did. But this time I wouldn't have to enter through the back door. The next morning, the media split down the middle. Half called her a master manipulator of public emotion. The other half, the first woman to speak truth to power, live. Inside Valen and Company, new lines were being drawn. The younger staff, operations teams, and assistants backed her more strongly than ever. Mid-level managers and a group of older shareholders quietly aligned themselves with Sebastian and Ingrid's faction. That evening, Elena returned late. When she entered her office, she found an unmarked envelope on her desk. Inside was an audio recording, a conversation between Ingrid and a minor shareholder discussing plans to call an early no-confidence vote. Clara entered, face pale. They're planning to unseat you. Elena closed her eyes. But when she opened them, her voice was calm. Then let's set the table. And make sure they sit in the very seats they once believed they'd never have to face. 3 days after Elena received the recording of the conversation between Ingrid and a minor shareholder, rumors of an early vote of no confidence were circulating across every floor of Valen & Company. No one said it aloud, but the glances, the hushed hallway chats, the sudden closed-door meetings, everything signaled that something was quietly being orchestrated behind her back. On Monday morning, Clara placed a printed list of voting shareholders in front of Elena during a private meeting. At the top were names Elena knew too well. Ulrich Weber, 4.1%. Ingrid Voss, 3.6%. Sebastian Kruger, 2.9%. With the 7 minor shareholders they're lobbying, Clara said softly, that's about 23%, enough to call for a vote. And if they gain more? Elena asked. With 15% more, they can demand an emergency shareholder meeting. And if they gather over 40% approval, you'll be legally required to step down within 30 days. Elena didn't react. She simply nodded and walked to the glass window. Outside, Frankfurt buzzed with life, the city unbothered, indifferent to the fact that one of Europe's largest firms was on the edge of upheaval. That afternoon, Elena didn't call a meeting. She didn't send a rebuttal email. Instead, she arranged a meeting with one person. Ludwig Hahn, the third-largest shareholder at Valen & Company, held 8.5% of the company. A man who rarely appeared, never spoke in meetings, never gave interviews, never took sides. He was an outsider. And in a world splitting into factions, the outsider was the one holding the balance. The meeting took place at a quiet, old Italian restaurant tucked behind Zeal Square. Elena arrived first, no assistant, no bodyguards. Ludwig appeared right on time, in a dark brown coat, his face lined with the seasons of a life that had seen too many transitions. You're not like the others, he said after his first glass of wine. Most come to me begging for a vote. I'm not here to beg, Elena replied. I'm here to show you the only thing Valen needs right now, someone with the courage to keep it from falling back into the hands of those who once rotted it from within. Ludwig looked at her for a long time, unblinking. You think I trust you more than them? No, Elena said calmly. I think you don't trust anyone. And that makes you more dangerous than they are. But it also makes you the only person I can trust right now. They signed nothing. Made no agreements. But as they left the restaurant, Ludwig said just one sentence. If they want to unseat you, let them try. But don't just hold the chair. Show them why you deserve to sit in it. 3 days later, the Valen building was in upheaval. Ingrid and Sebastian had formally submitted a petition for a no-confidence vote, gathering 38% support. Just 2% short. But the internal tide had already shifted. Half of the administrative staff had started signing anonymous letters opposing the bonus restructuring. A group of middle managers held an off-record meeting demanding leadership stability. The media had caught the scent of blood. Headlines splashed across financial sites. Elena Moreau, has the reformer moved too fast? Valen & Company on the brink of a corporate civil war? Clara entered the office, more tense than Elena had ever seen her. They're pushing you into a corner. One wrong move and they'll have the votes. Elena didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on an envelope that had just arrived on her desk, no return address, but sealed with the red stamp of Ludwig Hahn's legal representatives. She opened it. Inside was an official letter of support, a formal declaration backing the continued term of Chief Executive Officer Elena Moreau. Ludwig had picked a side. And that decision didn't just halt the vote. It tipped the entire balance of power. That night, in a closed-door meeting of the old guard, Ulrich glared at Ingrid and Sebastian. She's not just defending her seat. She's paving the road. And for the first time, we're the ones reacting. Ingrid took a slow drag from her cigarette, her eyes fixed on a projection of the updated shareholder map. Then it's time to go all in. Back in her 41st floor office, Elena pinned Ludwig's letter to the corkboard. But not as a trophy. As a reminder. The neutral can save you once. But if you stop proving why you belong, they'll leave you just as silently as they arrived. At dawn, the offices of Valen & Company were already lit. But today, it wasn't the desk lamps of the market research teams or the strategic planning departments. It was the executive floor that was glowing. And at the center of it, Elena Moreau, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, was personally arranging a series of files across the large boardroom table. Clara stood by the door, holding the internal investigation report they had quietly compiled over the past 2 weeks, a meticulous effort tracing data flows, anonymous email accounts, irregular financial movements tied to legacy contracts. and signs of internal leaks to the press. Elena said nothing. She looked at Clara with a resolute stare. Today, she said, we're not waiting to be attacked anymore. 9 a.m. The extended executive meeting convened. In attendance, the entire board of directors, department heads, legal counsel, and HR representatives. No agenda had been shared. No one knew what was coming. Elena began, no notes, no slides, no introductions. Before we talk about this quarter's numbers, I want us to look at something else. The truth. About us. She gestured. Clara stepped forward and handed each person a slim packet. At the top, printed in bold red. Summary of ethical breach indicators, not confidential. Heads lifted. I scanned the room. Inside the packet was a summary of the investigation, not naming individuals, but anyone involved would recognize their own actions. A finance team lead had quietly forwarded budget reports to a private email address. A regional director used a corporate account to wire funds to a shell company. A deputy HR director, someone who had publicly supported Elena, was revealed to be the source of the Vega Capital leak to the press. Silence fell across the room. Elena walked to the center, her gaze steady as it swept across the faces of the leadership. I'm not naming names. I don't need to shame anyone. What I do need is to remind you. This is no longer the old Valen, where power was a shield. From today onward, any act that endangers this company's ethical integrity will be dealt with immediately. And I'm starting now. She turned to her right. Sebastian Kruger was seated, his eyes narrowed. Sebastian, Elena said clearly, you authorized 4 contracts totaling over 20 million euros in the past 2 years with unverified vendors. I've submitted the report to the Audit Council, and I'm obligated to place you under suspension effective today. Sebastian's eyes tightened. You don't have that authority. I do, Elena replied firm. With majority approval from the board, I can suspend any executive under internal review for 30 days. And I have that approval. No one spoke. Not even Ingrid, who remained still. Clara, standing near the door, held the signed resolution in her hand. Sebastian stood. He didn't protest. He didn't argue. He only gave Elena a single glance, not like a man defeated, but like one who hadn't played his last card yet. When the meeting ended, the office grew still. Elena stayed behind, alone. Clara poured her a cup of hot tea, set it on the table, and looked at her with eyes that held something quiet, unspoken. Not worry. Not relief. But the weight of knowing the fight had only just begun. The look Clara gave Elena now was no longer that of an assistant, but of a worried companion. You've won. Elena gave a faint smile. Not yet. I've only cleaned out the rot. I haven't built anything new. Clara hesitated. Some people don't like being exposed in public. They won't let it go. Elena's gaze remained fixed on the internal power map on the board. Good, she said. I don't need them to let it go. I need them to react. Stupidly. And then I'll end every game they're still playing. Later that night, in a private suite at a hotel in southern Frankfurt, Sebastian met with Ingrid. His face was stone cold. She thinks she's taking me out, he said. But that was just an excuse. Ingrid looked up. She's about to trigger a restructuring of shareholder power, putting decision-making rights in the hands of employees. If she pulls that off, we'll never take this company back. Sebastian sat down and opened his laptop. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Records of past payments from Vega Capital. But it was the final line that truly mattered. A transaction log showing Elena once transferred personal funds from the parent company's account into the failed investment fund. Sebastian's voice was calm, almost clinical. We don't need to prove she's guilty. We just need people to believe she's no different from those she replaced. Ingrid nodded slowly. Then let's give the public another reason to flinch. She paused for just a beat, then projected the name on the screen. Sebastian Kruger. The room froze, as if someone had just sucked all the air out. Elena continued, her eyes fixed on the screen. He fabricated the evidence. But why? Because I dared to touch the system of privilege he was part of. Because I suspended his position with nothing more than a lawful decision. She turned to face the room. But that's not the most important thing I want to say. What matters is this. Much of what they say about me is true. I did advise Vega Capital. I was wrong. I lost faith in myself for a long time. And when I started over, I didn't want to be a leader. I just wanted to understand why people like my mother, like me back then, were always pushed to the margins. She paused, her voice softening. And when I understood, I realized there was only one way. To walk into the very place they never wanted me in. not to tear it down, but to rebuild it from the inside. No one spoke for 30 seconds. Then a small round of applause echoed from the back row. Then it spread. Even those who had once doubted her rose to their feet, not out of fear or obligation, but because they had just heard someone who dared to put truth above power. That evening, Sebastian Kruger was officially terminated, pending civil investigation. Ingrid disappeared from the building in silence, without farewell. And Elena, the woman who had nearly been consumed by her own past, now stood stronger than ever. In the office on the 41st floor, Clara stepped in, handing Elena a printed list of shareholders. "You're winning them back one by one," she said. Elena smiled softly. "I don't need them to follow me. I just need them to hear me. With their own ears, not through someone else." She looked out at the city, its lights glowing beneath the post-rain sky, and she knew the battle to claim the truth was over. But the journey to protect it, that was only just beginning.